So we're just a couple of days removed from the Acolyte episode 3, and as expected, given the lead up and everyone saying that this was going to be the episode that broke the Force and ruined Star Wars, there has been a lot of discourse online, but I want to kind of talk about the specifics of people saying that that episode ruined Anakin and made the Jedi evil, because neither point is necessarily true. And of course, if you don't like the episode because of specific things like, the acting not being the strongest, the presentation not being great, that's fine. If you don't like the Acolyte because mysteries are not necessarily your thing, or the time period is not to your liking, that's fine. I'm kind of talking directly to the people whose specific issues seem to be here that, again, Star Wars is ruined, the Force is ruined, Anakin is ruined, the Jedi are now evil. Those 4 points are all kind of wrong. Now, let's talk about, obviously, the main complaints around that episode. The first one being that, Anakin is ruined because now all of a sudden these witches can create life 100 years before Anakin, was born to a virgin birth. And it's kind of like, okay, well, first off, let's just talk about that. Anakin's birth has always been something that we've never been able to 100% say for certain in canon what exactly has happened. We just know that there was no father, he was born to a prophecy that he was the chosen one, and then we all know the rest of the story. Now, witches, and specifically, when it's hinted that they use unnatural dark side powers, being able to create life is not the same thing. Again, it's heavily referenced in The Phantom Menace that it was the will of the Force that Anakin comes about. And with this, it's a very specific act in the Acolyte. Again, we don't really know much because you don't need to know much. Why does it matter if these witches, are able to use their powers? It's a different element of the Force that we've not seen. And I think the important thing, which I'll reference in a little bit, is that the Force kind of needs to grow and expand beyond light and dark. Now, for those saying that, well, Anakin no longer being the only virgin birth ruins him, I think you've kind of missed the entire point of Anakin's character, and, you've ignored his entire story. Anakin isn't special because he's a virgin birth. Anakin isn't special because he's the chosen one. Anakin's special because he is the most unique character in Star Wars, and he embodies both the dark and the light, both aspects of it. On the light side, he is caring, he's compassionate, he's got, tons of love to give. And on the dark side of it, he's very passionate, he's clearly very powerful, he's easily swayed, and he is full of emotions like anger. So he has got the strongest of both sets within him. And the whole point of his character is to show that for you to be able to exist as a person, to be the best that you can be, you have to have balance. To literally bring balance to the Force, you have to embody both. And with the Jedi, they clearly tried to shut out the worst parts of the dark side. Love, and again, in their arrogant kind of dogmatic way, as the Jedi got, they decided that, no, you cannot have attachment, you cannot love. And that's what led Anakin, in the first instance, down the path of the dark side. On the opposite side, Palpatine clearly tried to influence, Anakin in the worst ways to shut out all of his, compassionate side. Apologies if you can hear my cat in the background. He likes to do this when I'm making videos. And so both sides were pulling at Anakin and trying to make him into their version of the best. But Anakin was neither. He really wasn't. He was himself. He was the best of both worlds. And it was only when he realised that he was truly redeemed and he was able to, again, break free of both the Jedi and the Sith. So if your reasoning is that, well, Anakin is ruined because he's no longer the only virgin birth, I've got news for you. That's not what made him special, and you've kind of lost the whole point of his story. Anakin, he's literally a school shooter. He's not a good person, but he's also not a terrible person. He's human. He is a kid thrown into a war, taken from his home. He was, again, that's another point. He wasn't taken per se, as in stolen. Yeah, but he was taken away from a pretty shitty home because he was a slave, but then thrown immediately into a war. And that does a lot to a person. So Anakin isn't this, sort of Jesus-like figure who can do no wrong. He's powerful, and I get the feeling that's why a lot of people like him, because they seem to follow power, which is a really concerning trait. That's kind of like ultimate dark side stuff. But Anakin is the most human character in Star Wars, and that's what makes him special. Now, talking about the Jedi and how the Acolyte is making them evil, it's not. Again, I think people are obviously trying to twist things to their own agenda. But the Jedi are shown definitely as being a little arrogant, because they come in, they think that they can do what they like, because they have the backing of the Republic. And to an extent, that's true. And the reason that the Jedi, do ultimately fall is because they are blinded by their own power. They've been unchallenged for so long that they don't see this hidden kind of dark side rising, and ultimately that's what lets Palpatine take control. They don't really question the idea of this mysterious clone army that comes out of nowhere. They use it. They put themselves in as the generals, and they fight a war. Despite all the time saying that they're not soldiers, they're peacekeepers. So you can't deny that even from George Lucas's own perspective in the prequels, the Jedi are arrogant. Now, they don't necessarily go around and steal kids. That's not what they do. And I think, again, people kind of ignore the fact that in the Acolyte episode 3, they don't just come in and try and steal Osha and May. They come in and they say, we want to test them to see if they could become Jedi. And, ultimately, they ask the kids, is this something that you want? May clearly says no. Osha says yes. And on both sides, there's kind of a little bit of manipulation. But what you kind of forget is that Osha and May's mother gives her blessing for her to go. Now, I'm pretty certain if she'd have said to the Jedi, no, we're not going to let you take our kids, I don't think the Jedi would have. Because at no point did the Jedi say, we're taking your kids. They just said, we want to test them. And obviously that got people riled up, and the Witches riled up, because, they could probably see where that was going. These kids are the first kind of hope that they've had in a long time. And now the Jedi are here threatening to influence them. And it's that fear. It's that fear of loss. It goes back to the kind of same mantra of, you have to let go of everything you fear to lose. It's a classic Star Wars tale. And that's what causes the animosity. And obviously there's a lot more that's gone on in that episode than has been revealed. That's not the last time we're going to see that. Definitely something went down there with the Jedi. So there's more to that story than leads on. But if your idea is that this show is making the Jedi evil, you are either intentionally or ignorantly, misrepresenting the entire story. And I don't think you quite understand it. The Jedi are in power. There's always going to be bad Jedi. There's always going to be Jedi who like that power, and they are the ones that will always fall, because the Jedi aren't perfect. The Jedi aren't a perfect organization. There are going to be people who make mistakes, and that's the whole point, is that we're seeing individuals who have made mistakes. Torben clearly knows that he made a mistake because he ends up accepting, poison because he feels so guilty. And there's nothing wrong with that. The Jedi aren't perfect. They can't be. The light side isn't perfect. And if that's the way that you want Star Wars to be, then I've got news for you. Star Wars isn't going to survive. Having this black and white idea of both the Force and morality, having the Jedi be perfect, the Sith be ultimately evil, and even just containing that to Jedi and Sith is going to kill Star Wars. It's okay to have it that black and white if you're having a set of films. If your plans for Star Wars is to have those 3 original trilogy films and that's it, great. Keep it black and white. Have it be a space fantasy where the hero triumphs over evil, and that's that. But if you want to build an entire universe, if you want to keep Star Wars going, you have to make it a little bit more grey. You have to muddy the waters a little. You have to expand the idea of the Force. You have to go in depth into the Jedi and the Sith and the individuals that make all of this up. Otherwise, you get the same story on repeat ad nauseum, and it's going to become boring, and ultimately will just become something that people will lose interest in. This way, I mean, you can't deny, people are talking about Star Wars. People are talking about The Acolyte. The viewing figures for last week were pretty strong. 11 million for the first week. That's pretty strong. Well, it was the first 5 days, technically, so... obviously that's not Stranger Things numbers, but it's still very strong. And again, it just leads back to this whole kind of people being bad faith actors just trying to stir the pot. And it is a minority. No matter what people say, no matter how many Rotten Tomatoes scores you throw up in our faces, it's the minority. They are vocal. They review bomb. They dislike bomb. I think the majority of people, will have, some issues with certain aspects of storytelling. Like, the episode wasn't perfect. I didn't like the twins, the young version of the twins. I just didn't feel like they were directed very well. They didn't act very well. But I'm not going to diss kids. We've learned from Jake Lloyd, they are just kids. Could the presentation and editing be a bit better? Sure. But I'm all here for the mystery of the story. I'm all here for the characters. The characters themselves are really intriguing. And so I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. I want to know what happened, on Brendark that we didn't get to see. So if you're so narrow-minded to think that Anakin's only special because he was a virgin birth, you've not been paying attention to the story. If you're so narrow-minded to think that the Jedi are being presented as evil, again, you're not paying attention to the story. If you're so narrow-minded as to think, the Jedi have to be perfect, the Sith have to be evil, maybe just stick to watching the original trilogy, because that's where you can stick it to being black and white. But right now, Star Wars needs to grow and expand and become bigger. And if we get new things like covens of witches, again, people won't like it because lesbians, women, etc., etc. And, there has been a lot of that. A lot of the memes have been around kind of lesbians conceiving kids, and it's kind of like, okay, that's your perspective, whatever. But the Force hasn't been ruined. Star Wars hasn't been ruined. They say this every show. It's kind of like, Star Wars is ruined. And actually, all we've gotten is an expansion of lore. We've seen, the world grow. And I'm all for that, So, again, just take some time. Maybe have some critical thinking. Think about what I've just said. If we want Star Wars to continue, it needs to change. It needs to grow. It's not as black and white as you think. And again, maybe just have a think on Anakin's story and think about what made him so special. He is the ultimate balance of the Force. He's the best of the light, the best of the dark. If you let one of those two dominate, it's going to cause disaster. He's going to swing wildly from one way to the other. Luke is a much better perspective on, someone who is a little bit more perfect. He is definitely more of an embodiment of the light, but he's still got those dark side aspects. He's not as wildly emotional as Anakin was, but he's still got all of the best traits, and he's someone very similar, someone who could fall to the dark side if he was led down the wrong path. But it's again, Anakin's story served to tell Luke's story. That's another element of it. Anakin's not there just to be the chosen one. He's there to be a vessel for other people. So anyway, I've said my bit. Thanks for watching. See you for the next episode of The Acolyte.